Well, good evening. We're going to read a number of poems today about spring. And two of the poems concern daffodils. One will be very familiar to you. And one is a very much earlier poem on daffodils by Robert Herrick, who was born right at the end of Shakespeare's life, as it were, 1591, but lived right the way through to 1674. So he's very much a 17th century poet. And this one still takes a very allegorical line with daffodils, seeing them as transient, passing. To daffodils. Fair daffodils, we weep to see you haste away so soon. As yet the early rising sun has not attained his noon. Stay, stay, until the hasting day has run but to the evensong. And having prayed together, we will go with you along. We have short time to stay as you, we have as short a spring, as quick a growth to meet decay as you or anything. We die as your hours do and dry away like to the summer's rain, or as the pearls of morning's dew, never to be found again. Well, the very famous poem on daffodils was written by William Wordsworth much, much later. It came out of very interestingly, he was very close to his sister Dorothy, and they were wandering along the banks of the lake in the Lake District, Lake Grasmere, when they saw this line of daffodils all the way along the shore. And a couple of years later, Wordsworth came across her diary entry and composed this poem somewhere between 1804 and 1807 when it was published. He then revised it later for a second edition in 1815, adding an extra stanza, what is now the second stanza. But it's interesting that it came out of actually a mutual observation of these daffodils by Dorothy and William Wordsworth, but it became a poem which sort of archetypally starts with this word lonely. I wandered lonely as a cloud. And then ends with solitude. So it's very much about the impact of the daffodils on the eye. It's so famous in England that it's been parodied numerous times, including in advertisements for Heineken, for example. But when it was a centenary of the poem in 1804, in 1904, the 150,000 school children recited it. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Well, you can see why it's become incredibly popular. I'm going to read a poem from the late 19th century now by a poet who I think is not so well known in Poland, but Robert Browning is very much read in England and studied in schools, for example, his poem, My Last Duchess. But the first line of this poem is also incredibly well known. The poem is called Home Thoughts from Abroad. And like the Yeats poem, which we did some time ago, where Yeats imagines the Lake Isle of Innisfree while he's in London, this poem imagines being in England when he's not there. So he imagines vividly all the beautiful natural effects of nature in April and May. So it's very timely. Home Thoughts from Abroad. Oh, to be in England now that April's there, and whoever wakes in England sees some morning unaware that the lowest boughs and the brushwood sheaf round the elm tree bole are in tiny leaf, while the chaffinch sings on the orchard bough, in England now. And after April, when May follows, and the white-throat bills and all the swallows, hark, where my blossomed pear tree in the hedge leans to the field and scatters on the clover blossoms and dewdrops at the bent spray's edge. That's the wise thrush. He sings each song twice over, lest you should think he never could recapture the first fine, careless rapture. And though the fields look rough with hoary dew, all will be gay when noontide wakes anew the buttercups, the little children's dower, far brighter than this gaudy melon flower. And last poem in this sequence on spring is a poem, one of the many poems that the great novelist Thomas Hardy wrote. He was also a tremendous poet, and very unusual to be a great novelist and a great poet. He lived an extraordinarily long time, from 1840 to 1928. And his volume of poems is absolutely massive. And this one is called The Year's Awakening. And it's a wonderful poem because it looks at the way in which spring works without actually having any idea how all the trees, all the plants, all the birds know exactly when to spring up. And so it has that sense of the real mystery of nature. And I'm very glad to be introduced to this poem by Professor Zabawa. It's a beautiful poem. So it's called The Year's Awakening. How do you know that the pilgrim track along the belting zodiac, swept by the sun in his seeming rounds, is traced by now to the fish's bounds and into the ram, when weeks of cloud have wrapped the sky in a clammy shroud, and never as yet a tinct of spring has shone in the earth's appareling? Oh, vespering bird, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know, deep underground, hid in your bed from sight and sound, without a turn in temperature, with weather life can scarce endure, that light has won a fraction's strength, and day put on some moment's length, whereof in merest rote will come weeks hence, mild airs that do not numb. O crocus root, how do you know? How do you know? And now I'm going to read from one of the great romantic poets, Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was an exact contemporary of John Keats, was born slightly earlier, 1792, died in 1822 off Livorno in Italy, sailing into a storm. And he came from a very aristocratic background, but the extraordinary thing from the point of view of poetry is that he had this remarkably musical ear. And so it's a very appropriate poem for him. It's an ode to a skylark, which, as you know, is one of the most beautiful bird songs around. And he tried, I think, to capture, rather like Vaughan Williams in his Lark Ascending, he tried to capture the sense of the birds rising song in the form of the poem. It's a long poem in many stanzas, but I think very beautiful. Ode to a Skylark. Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. Higher still and higher from the earth thou springest like a cloud of fire. The blue deep thou wingest, and singing still dost soar, and soaring ever singest. In the golden lightning of the sunken sun, o'er which clouds are brightening, thou dost float and run like an unbodied joy whose race is just begun. The pale purple even melts around thy flight like a star of heaven in the broad daylight. Thou art unseen, but yet I still hear thy shrill delight. Keen as are the arrows of that silver sphere, whose intense lamp narrows in the white dawn clear, until we hardly see, we feel that it is there. All the earth and air with thy voice is loud, as when night is bare from one lonely cloud, the moon rains out her beams, and heaven is overflowed. What thou art we know not, what is most like thee? From rainbow clouds there flow not drops so bright to see, as from thy presence showers of rain of melody. Like a poet hidden in the light of thought, singing hymns unbidden, till the world is wrought to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. Like a high-born maiden in a palace tower, soothing her love-laden soul in secret hour with music sweet as love, which overflows her bower. Like a glowworm golden in a dell of dew, scattering unbeholden its aerial hue among the flowers and grass which screen it from the view. Like a rose embowered in its own green leaves, by warm winds deflowered, till the scent it gives makes faint with too much sweet these heavy winged thieves. Sound of vernal showers on the twinkling grass, rain awakened flowers, all that ever was joyous and clear and fresh, thy music doth surpass. Teach us, sprite or bird, what sweet thoughts are thine? I have never heard praise of love or wine that panted forth a flood of rapture so divine. Chorus, hymeneal, or triumphal chant, match with thine would be all but an empty vaunt, a thing wherein we feel there is some hidden want. What objects are the fountains of thy happy strain? What fields or waves or mountains? What shapes of sky or plain? What love of thine own kind? What ignorance of pain? With thy clear, keen joyance, languor cannot be. Shadow of annoyance never came near thee. Thou lovest, but ne'er knew love's sad satiety. Waking or asleep, thou of death must deem things more true and deep than we mortals dream. Or how could thy notes flow in such a crystal stream? We look before and after and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Yet if we could scorn, hate and pride and fear, if we were things born not to shed a tear, I know not how thy joy we ever should come near. Better than all measures of delightful sound, better than all treasures that in books are found, thy skill to poet were, thou scorner of the ground. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know, such harmonious madness from my lips would flow. The world should listen then, as I am listening now. Well, poor Shelley, alas, poor Shelley, he died, as I say, in this very tragic way, sailing with full sail into a storm. But the really last poem we're going to read today is by Robert Frost, who lived from 1874 to 1963, and from an English point of view, one of his most important things was that he influenced the great poet Edward Thomas to write poetry and turn from writing prose appreciations of the landscape to writing a wonderful series of poems. And it was really his friendship with Frost which inspired him. And I got to know this poem in a rather curious way because I was discussing with an American colleague in a library in Washington the comparative benefits or strengths of Thomas and Frost. And I said that I thought Edward Thomas was a greater lyrical poet than Frost. And he then quoted the whole of this poem at me. And I said, well, I give in because it is a beautiful poem. And it's about a species of butterfly which actually has become extinct in England. That's been reintroduced recently, the large blue, and which depends for its existence on red ants, rather curiously. A particular species of red ant is necessary to give birth to each butterfly. Blue Butterfly Day. It is Blue Butterfly Day here in spring, and with these sky flakes down in flurry on flurry, there is more unmixed colour on the wing than flowers will show for days unless they hurry. But these are flowers that fly and all but sing. And now, from having ridden out desire, they lie closed over in the wind and cling where wheels have freshly sliced the April mire.